Hello, my name is LaMonica Jones, and I'm the Procurement and Purchasing Compliance Officer with Right from the Start, Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. I want to welcome you to our next Procurement Masterclass, which is on the competitive bid process. Our learning objectives for today's masterclass will be to learn the requirements for the competitive bid process, as well as understand when it is necessary to execute this process. We will also clarify any misunderstandings related to the competitive bid process. And lastly, understand what the state agency's review role is as it is related to this process. Here you will find our non-discrimination statement, which must be included on all procurement documents related to the child nutrition programs, the child and adult food care service program, the summer food service program, along with all of our procurement documents. These are the federal requirements that are regulating the procurement processes that we have in place. We have the Child and Adult Food Care Program, which regulations are found in 7 CFR 226.22. For the Summer Food Service Program, the federal requirements can be found in 7 CFR 225.17, as well as the General Procurement Standards found in 2 CFR 200.317 through 326. And these general procurement standards must be followed by any federal recipient or any recipient of a federal award, as well as the subrecipients of a federal award. And lastly, we have FNS instruction, which is, of course, FNS 796-2 Revision 4. These are the standards that govern all of the budget and financial regulations as it relates to the Child and Adult Food Care Program, as well as the Summer Food Service Program. Now, when you are engaging in any sort of procurement process, it is mindful that you are aware of the type of procurement code that must be followed. And this is a handy chart that we have to help you decipher based off of the type of institution or program provider that you are to know which regulation governs your individual institution or program. So if you look at this far left-hand column, we have the type of institution, and we will use the first row, the public schools, as an example. And say, for example, we have the public schools, their program regulations as participants of the CACFP as well as FSSP. SFSP, we know that they are regulated in 7 CFR 225 and 7 CFR 226, as well as they are all governed by the general procurement codes, which are found in 200.317-326. This is as a result of them being recipients of a federal award. Now, this procurement code, as well as the allowable cost rules, are what will differ based off of the type of program. Again, using the public schools as an example, the procurement code options that a public school must follow state that they must follow state or local procurement codes, except for provisions which are inconsistent with federal procurement requirements. So they must follow anything state or local regulated in addition to what is federal. However, if they are not consistent with what federal regulations state, then those provisions cannot be followed. In addition, it says state or local codes must be more stringent than federal. So as for an example, we know that the federal procurement requirement is $250,000. So if you reach this threshold, if you've gone over $250,000, that's when you must execute the federal procurement requirement. However, if you are a state or federal institution, in this example, we'll use public schools, if your federal procurement requirement is $100,000, then you must engage in a competitive bid process or the formal procurement requirement because your procurement thresholds are more restrictive than what the federal threshold is. And in addition, we have the allowable cost rule, and the allowable cost rule for public schools is found in 2 CFR Part 200, and this pretty much governs how they are to handle their budget, their costs as it relates to this individual program. So please familiarize yourself with this chart based off of the type of institution or program provider that you are, and this will help you determine which cost rules, which procurement code, as well as which federal regulation you are responsible for adhering to. So as stated in the beginning, this specific masterclass is going to be dedicated to the formal or competitive bidding process. We are going to start with the invitation for bid process, which is the simpler of the two processes. We have invitation for bid, or IS RFB, and we also have the request for proposal, which is RFP. So bids that are expected to exceed the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000 must be publicly solicited. So in the event you have food costs that will exceed the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000, you must engage in a competitive bid process. Anything lower than that is considered an informal procurement process, and you are not required to go through with the competitive bid. Competitive bids will result in a firm fixed price contract that's a lump sum or a unit price. So once the bidding process is done and the contract is solidified, you should have a lump sum dollar amount for the contracted goods that you have solicited pricing for. And lastly, if you are a program provider or a sponsor who is providing vended or unitized meals as part of your food service program, it is suggested that you first contact a school food authority. And a school food authority is simply one of your school districts. It is a school site. And the reason for this is because schools are generally participating in the National School Lunch Program. They are already familiar with how to conduct or how to compile a creditable meal. And so they also have the components that are necessary to complete this meal. And so it's encouraged that you utilize the school food authorities on the front end before engaging in the formal procurement method. In addition, when you contact the school food authority, if your food costs will exceed that $250,000 threshold, it is not a requirement that you would engage in formal procurement. So if you have a school district that is able to provide you with the unitized, prepackaged, prepared meals that are needed for your food service program and your food costs are over $250,000, you are not required to engage in any sort of competitive bid or formal procurement process. So the purpose of procurement, of formal procurement, and all procurement is competition. Procurement transactions must be conducted in a manner providing full and open competition. And the reason for this is that we want to ensure objective contractor performance and eliminate any unfair competitive advantage. Simply put, we want to make sure that the vendors that are available, whether it's individual meal components or whether they are vended, prepackaged, prepared meals, we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to bid on the items that are needed. If they are an individual food vendor, we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to know that these programs are available and that you have a need and they could possibly meet that need. And secondly, contractors, suppliers, vendors, or any of the sort that developed or drafted specifications, any sort of your requirements as it's related to this competitive bid process, as well as statements of work, any of the bidding templates that are going to be used, they must be excluded from such procurements. And the reason for this is because it eliminates that full and open competition that is stated above. We are removing the competition, we are removing the fairness, we are removing the transparency of the entire procurement process when we allow a vendor to take part in the compiling these documentations that you will ultimately be using as a part of your contract. So how to develop an effective bid? The first step to creating an effective bid is going to be developing a bid advertisement. Now, this bid advertisement is going to be a public release that's going to be posted in your local news outlet of your choosing. We ask that you choose a local news source that is most able to service the locations that the meals or food items will be delivered to. So if you are a program that is related in South Georgia, it is best that you utilize a local news outlet that is available not in North Georgia, but that is available in South Georgia where you are located. There is no specification as far as what news outlet is required. We just want to use, the requirement is that you simply post it, and that posting must be held open for 14 days, as well as you choose to utilize a newspaper that is going to best service your program. And as an additional component, the reimbursement that you receive as a result of serving your credible meals and participating in either one of our child nutrition programs, the reimbursement may be used to cover those costs. So when you're creating a bid advertisement, there are several components that you want to make sure are included in that advertisement. And at DCAL, we do not have an official template, but we do have a sample advertisement that if you request it, I will send it to you so that it can be viewed. So that advertisement, what it should contain are, of course, the name, the address, and the contact information of your facility, as well as the person who will be responsible for receiving the bids and who will be responsible for answering any questions. In addition to this, it is helpful for you to include, of course, which program you will be servicing, the opening and closing dates of the bidding period. So if it's open, again, it must be maintained open for 14 days. So if that bid will be open, for example, from July 1st to July 15th, you want to make sure that that information is included within the advertisement as well as the actual bid opening. So that bid is open from the 1st until the 15th, and then that bid opening is held on the 16th. We want to make sure that that information is included in that advertisement. Additional information that should be included are your program service areas. Because a lot of vendors, specifically food distributors of individual food items, because they work in territories and they have different counties that they work in, you will want to make sure that you specify which areas your program exists or what areas you have the greatest needs. So those also must be included within the advertisement. In addition to these items, it would be helpful, especially if you are a provider of vending meals, to include the number of meals. And this will give the potential supplier or vendor an idea of the number of meals that you are utilizing. It will help them to better gauge whether or not they actually can provide you with the items that you will need on the back end as a result of this competitive bid process. It's also encouraged that you include the non-discrimination statement, as well as a note letting potential vendors and suppliers know that right from the start will be reviewing their solicitations. So you want to let them know that as a courtesy and you remaining transparent and open and honest, that their bids will be reviewed by the state agency. Next, you want to create a specification sheet. And the specification sheet is rather simple. It's just a listing of your items, the quantity that you need, the estimated quantity for the duration of the contract. Typical contracts are 1 year long. So you want to have a list of the items that you need. You want to make sure you have the quantities that you will need, the estimated quantities, as well as the pack size. And then the next column will be an option for the vendor to put in their pricing. And in the very last column, it will be a simple formula so that you can multiply the case number by the price that is provided, which will give you the entire price for that item for the entire year. And on the next slide, I will show you a sample of what that specification sheet looks like. Third, you will have to complete an invitation for bid package. And we do have a decal template available. This template will make it easier for you to compile the terms and the conditions that are necessary for a vendor to complete when it comes to completing a competitive bid process for a child nutrition program or the summer food service program, as well as the federal requirements for being a vendor that it will ultimately be the recipient of a federal award. So the invitation for bid package, it must include information such as the anticipated contract period, the items that will be included in the solicitation. We also have a termination for a contract termination clause, as well as all applicable signatures must be included in this invitation for bid template. You do have the ability to draft your own template. In the event that you will or you desire to draft your own template, Decal, we do have a checklist, and with this checklist, we'll provide our highlighted pieces that must be included with this template or within this template. And prior to your solicitation being made public, the state agency Decal will have to review this to make sure that it is compliant with all federal and program regulations. Next, you want to ensure that your terms, conditions, and regulations are included within the solicitation. As stated a minute ago, the Decal template does have those those regulations, terms, and conditions already noted within the template. But if you are drafting it on your own, you will, of course, have to make sure that they are included. And lastly, you want to create an evaluation sheet with criteria, scored on a pass or fail basis. An invitation for bid is, like, again, a relatively simple process that is evaluated on a pass or fail basis. There's no percentage, there's no points. It is simply, did the vendor provide this information? Did they sufficiently include this pricing? Did they bid on all items? And it is a pass or a fail basis. And I will include a sample of a evaluation sheet just so that you can get a gauge and an idea on how simple the evaluation sheet is. So again, here's the specification sheet. You can see we have a list of the products. Whenever you are listing a branded product, you also want to make sure that you have an allowance for a generic product or an off-brand product. So you eliminate competition when you specifically ask for a branded product, unless this is a situation where you have some sort of machine and the machine only can only handle a branded product. In that case, we wouldn't actually contract for it. You could have the ability to utilize a non-competitive procurement, which we have discussed on a previous masterclass. So whenever you have a specification sheet, you want to make sure, again, like I said, that if you're asking for a branded product, that there's something in your solicitation document that states, along with a branded product, that generic alternatives or brand alternatives are allowable. And you can see we have the pack size, the estimated quantity, the purchase price. Of course, in your situation would be blank because this is where the vendor would input the price. And once the vendor inputs the price, we have the extended price, which multiplies the case quantity by the purchase price, which gives you your extended price. And at the very bottom, you'll see a subtotal. If you categorize your cost, this is extremely helpful because you will be able to see per category how much the vendor bid on for each individual price. Next, we have the bid opening. So when you're conducting a bid opening for a competitive bid process, you want to make sure that all submissions are safeguarded. So whether the person is mailing them, whether they are dropped off, or whether they are emailed, you want to make sure that there are processes in place to keep those bids safeguarded so that they're kept in a locked and secure location where they cannot be opened prior to the actual bid opening. When you do receive submissions, you want to make sure that the name or the individual firm is recorded, that the date and time the submission was received is recorded and noted, as well as whether the submission arrived sealed or unsealed, and then how it was sent in. So was it received by mail? Was it received by the first? Was it received on the second? Who submitted it? And then the name of the individual or the organization that was responsible, who is responsible for that bid packet. You want to make sure that all of that is noted. In the event that you are accepting bids via email, which this is allowable, you want to make sure that you follow these same processes. However, when receiving an email solicitation package, you want to make sure that you do not open the attachments. It is perfectly acceptable to record the date, the name, and the time that the solicitation email was received, but you will not open the attachments on the email until the actual day of the bid opening. And so there must be processes in place if you receive email bids that fall aligned with this actual bid opening process to ensure that they're not opened beforehand. Sponsoring organizations must have a state agency representative present for all SFSP bid openings. So somebody from DECAL will be present, whether it's face-to-face or conference call. There will be a DECAL representative present for all bid openings. This is not a requirement for CACFP, but for SFSP, there will be a DECAL representative present. And sponsoring organizations must notify the state agency of the time and place at least 14 days before the bid opening. And typically this information is included not only within the advertisement, but also within the invitation for bid solicitation packet. Now, you've reached the day of the actual bid opening. What does this look like? So a bid opening may be postponed if there is a material delay in mail or communication system that is beyond the control or with fault or negligence. So if something happens and mail is not received, FedEx is not delivering, if there's some sort of material delay in communication, if emails are down, you have no way of receiving information, a bid opening may be postponed. If there's an emergency or unanticipated event that must interrupt your normal process of conducting a bid opening, it may be postponed or canceled, but public notice must be posted. You don't have to take out a new advertisement, but if you can post it on your Facebook pages, if you can send it out via email, please notify DCAL as well. But however you can get public notice, if it's noted on your door, however you can get the public notified that there is a postponement or a cancellation for their bid opening, you must follow suit and do so. So once you've had this bid opening, you've recorded all of your responses, and everyone has, you've done your pass or your fail, and you've noted the information that is included inside the bid, you are now at the place where you will conduct a bid evaluation. So bid responses must be evaluated by the organization and awarded in writing to the most responsive and responsible bidder, providing the lowest price. With an invitation for bid and a request for quote, the competitive bid process is always going to be awarded on the lowest price. And where specified in the bidding documents, discounts, transportation costs, lifestyle costs, any additional discounts or costing must be included in that final price. So if there are special order pricing, if there are freight charges, if there's fuel surcharges, if there are discounts for paying in 10 days versus 30 days, all of that information must be included and factored into that pricing. As part of the contract and as part of the evaluation, there cannot be any additional pricing noted on the bid price. So you shouldn't receive $2 for a case of bread, and then once you receive your invoice, you get $2 for 10 cases plus a $15 fuel surcharge. That fuel surcharge must be included in that final price when it comes to contracts. And lastly, CFR 200-320, Section V states that bids must be rejected if there is a sound documented reason. So if there is a reason why you must reject a bid, if it was received opened, if it was not received on time, if there is a documented reason that you have to reject the bid, you may do so. And if the lowest bid is not awarded, if for some reason, again, you cannot follow through with the requirement to award to the lowest price vendor, if you cannot do so, then you must specify in writing to DCAL the reason for being unable to do so. And what will typically happen, because I will be the person who is receiving those solicitations, what I will ask is that you would submit this reasoning on a company letterhead signed by either the program contact or the executive director. And this just shows that you follow through with the process and that for whatever the reason may be, that you are unable to award it to the lowest cost bid. We just want to make sure that we have something formal, because this is a legally binding document. And in the event that you have a reviewer that comes out, or if there is a protest procedure as a result of not awarding to the lowest price vendor, we want to make sure that there are processes in place that justify and that back up your reasons for not awarding to that lowest price vendor. And here's the sample bid evaluation. As you can see, it's just a simple pass or fail basis. Was it submitted on time? Was the bid submitted in triplicate? Were the bid bonds included? We will get into whether or not a bid bond is required or not. Health inspection, references. The one thing that is not listed on here is the financial viability piece. As a part of the competitive bid process, all vendors and suppliers that will be soliciting pricing must show that they are financially viable to participate in the items that they are bidding on. So that financial viability will look like either a financial statement, or if they're unable to provide a financial statement, they must provide a notarized document stating that that particular company has not filed for bankruptcy in the past 5 years. So either one of those options must be included along with these items. And these are just the bare minimum items, along with applicable signatures, pricing, and information that is included inside the solicitation. So as you can see, this is a relatively simple bid evaluation. We have bidder one who passed all of the requirements that were set forth, and then they were also the lowest price bidder at $187,000. So in this ideal situation, they would be awarded the contract. So let's just say you do have a bid and you've done your evaluating, and after you've completed your evaluation, you realize that you have received some non-responsive bid. So any response that fails to meet the bid specifications is considered a non-responsive bid, and all submissions missing required information must be rejected. So if a bid bond was not submitted, if there were no references, if there were no financial statements, if any piece of that information was not submitted that is required information, then it must be rejected. In addition, these types of submissions must also be rejected: bids that are received unsealed, bids that do not conform to the bid specifications and also do not offer an equivalent. So if you ask for a branded product and you received a generic product, that is not grounds for rejecting the bid. If you ask for a branded product and they gave no alternatives, yes, that is grounds for rejecting the bid. Any document that alters or changes the terms and conditions of the invitation for bid, those must be rejected. What I see a lot are vendors and suppliers who will change delivery times, they will change invoicing times, they will change pricing, or they will change some sort of term or conditions inside the bid. That bid is a contract between where you are the authority on that contract. So what that bid states is what the vendor or supplier that is bidding on those items must comply by, and they may not be altered in any sort of way. Now, on the opposite side of that, there may be a set of terms and conditions that you have to comply with in order to do business with this given company. Now, that organization may have separate terms and conditions, but as it relates to this specific contract and the requirements, the terms and the conditions must not be altered. If they are altered and the vendor submits bid pricing but is unable to comply with the requirements, you are within your right and within scope to reject those bids. And then bids that fail to contain the required bid bonds or any certifications, these bids must also be rejected. And anything that fails to comply with applicable state, local, or federal requirements, these must also be rejected. And lastly, bids that are submitted late. So if it comes in after the bid date, if it comes in after the bid response time, after the bid has closed, those are automatically rejected. And any bid that may be rejected if the price or any lines are material unbalanced. So if you are going through your evaluation and you are looking through all the items that were bid on, if you notice that in comparison to what you may have received previously, and then in line with what you may have received as far as bid pricing from other vendors, if it is materially unbalanced, you may reject that pricing. When you do have to reject bids, you find yourself in a situation that bids have to be rejected. You must notify the bid respondents when they have been rejected and the reason for such. And in the event that you have a bid process and all of the bids have to be rejected, you will and you must have to go through that bid process again. So the one thing that we do have as an option for a method of evaluation, in addition to just a simple pass or fail basis, is a market analysis. And a market analysis is a method of awarding contracts based on an evaluation of the lowest price a vendor can offer for a representative sample of goods desires. So simply put, a market basket analysis is you have a bid process and you can take 75% of the items that are received, of the pricing received, and that pricing received represents 75%, and that 75% represents the entire whole of the items that you are soliciting pricing for. If you can take that representative sample and use it, this regulation states that you can use that 75% as a representative sample or a method for evaluating the entire solicitation. So again, and I'll repeat it, the market basket analysis simply states you are able to take a representative sample of the bid items received and use that to evaluate the sum total of all the items received, and that percentage or that gauge must be at least 75%. We don't have a lot of institutions that do that. This is mainly in situations where you are a large sponsor or school districts are familiar with using this process. And the reason why they use this is because they have many items that they're bidding on. And so it can be kind of taxing and difficult to have to go line by line item to evaluate. And so USDA has allowed for this option to use a representative sample to evaluate the entire solicitation. But when you are utilizing this, you still must make sure that you comply with all federal procurement guidelines. So you still must factor in thresholds. You still must factor in all other requirements for the federal procurement process. In addition, it's an option when price can be simplified and a valid price analysis can be achieved. So when you are looking at a quite a few items, but this will simplify your evaluation process, then you're looking at similar items, and this will simplify your evaluation process. Market basket analysis can be used, but USDA still prefers evaluating all the goods in order to determine a bottom line or total cost. So even though you have the market basket analysis as an option, USDA still prefers that you utilize the bottom line and look at each individual item to determine the lowest price. So you've evaluated the bid, you've had your bid opening. Now it is time to award the bid. You want to make sure that when it comes to awarding the bid, that once you've completed it, that you've selected an apparent winner. You want to send all copies of the evaluation sheets and the bid responses to DECAL for review and approval prior to notifying the awarded vendor. And then after DECAL, which will approve what is received, and they will notify the bidder of the award by sending a contract award letter to the designated official. So you've completed your evaluation, you've noted the apparent winner of the award. You want to make sure that you send all copies of the evaluation sheets and your bid responses to DECAL for review and approval prior to notifying the awarded vendor. DECAL will then review the bid responses as well as your evaluation sheets, and you will receive in writing via email whether the award was agreed upon or whether there may be some sort of differing opinion. And once that is complete, and if DECAL approves the award, you will notify the vendor by sending a award letter. And the award letter is relatively simple. It is just a letter that will say ABC vendor is awarded food items for either CACFP, SFSP for $289,000 for X amount of contract period. You want to make sure that you have that information inside that contract award letter, have the vendor sign it and date it. As a program provider, you sign it and date it, and then upload it in Atlas, and of course, send it to DECAL and attach a copy to your contract. And next, we will go through the formal procurement process, specifically the request for proposal. Now, the request for proposal, or RFP, is normally conducted when one or more stores submitting an offer, either a fixed price or cost reimbursement type contract, is awarded. It is generally used when conditions are not appropriate for the use of sealed bids and price and technicality factors are considered. So with a request for proposal, this process is much more lengthier and it's much more detailed. And the reason for this is because there are several aspects of the contract that must be negotiated and must be discussed prior to awarding the contract. So it's much more in-depth compared to an invitation for bid, where you are simply looking at the items, submitting and pricing, and then awarding to the lowest price vendor. So for the request for proposal, or RFP, DECAL and your organization must ensure that proposals are solicited from an adequate number of qualified sources. So this typically will have to be more than one source. RFP has identified all significant evaluation factors, including price as the primary factor. So everything that goes into this entire request for proposal package, all factors must be included, whether it's transportation, delivery times, setup charges, staff, everything must be included in this RFP process. It still has to be publicized for a reasonable request by other sources to compete. The organization has a written method for conducting technical evaluations and selecting recipients, which is the same as an invitation for a bid process. And the award will be made to a responsible party whose proposal was most advantageous to the organization, with price as a primary factor. Again, price will always be a primary factor and must be awarded to the lowest price vendor, whether you're utilizing invitation for bid or a request for proposal. When developing a scope of work for the RFP, you want to make sure that it is attached to the template so that vendors and potential suppliers get a full gauge and full understanding of exactly what it is that you are requiring. That sponsors and institutions must determine the general extent or scope of work to be performed by the food service management company, the food vendor, the contractor, whomever is bidding on the goods and services. You want to make sure that you determine the extent or the scope of work to be performed. This may mean talking to a couple people, your kitchen staff, maybe your delivery drivers, your warehouse staff. So there may be some conversations that need to be conducted in order to get the general scope of the work that will be performed. And again, some of these duties may include, if you're a school district, storage of USDA foods, relationships you have with farmers, vendors, all these types of information. You just want to make sure that you have a well-rounded discussion with as many people who will be involved in this work as possible so that you can have a good gauge on the scope of work to be performed. And lastly, of course, decal. We do have a template that is available for you, so please don't feel that you have to draft your own specifications. We do have a template with the terms and conditions. However, your scope of work, which is typically more lengthier in description, that may be outlined in addition to the template, which is just signatures and the terms and conditions for the solicitation. So there are two types of ways to evaluate a request for proposal. The first one is the one-step method, which you evaluate price and technical specifications together, which will then get you the bid award. So this is more aligned with the invitation for bid, which is just a simple bid process. But then we also have the two-step procurement method, which is what a lot of requests for proposal program providers, when they're utilizing this method, they use the two-step method, which is adequate for them when it comes to utilizing this method. So the first step will be to evaluate the technical specifications. So you will make sure that you will review in this first step delivery timeframes. If you are, for an example, a mobile meals bus, you will review the requirements of serving meals on a mobile meal bus. Each location that this bus will go, if there's any sort of additional staff that is needed, all these technical specifications exclusive of price must be evaluated in this first step. And those bid responders that are able to score 85% or above for the technical specification step, this first step method, they will then move on to the next step. And step 2 is the negotiations. So you will negotiate those technical specifications. Maybe there's a discussion where you need meals delivered at 11:15, between 12:15. However, due to the time range and that the bus is able to move and to get meals to you at the appropriate temperature, maybe that bus needs to deliver meals between 11:30 and 12:30. So those type of negotiations will take place, and you will discuss that. And once the negotiations are complete and they are satisfactory, then the bidders will have the opportunity to submit their best and final offer. This is the space where the pricing takes place. So you discuss the technical specifications, they have agreed and they have scored 85% or above. You've conducted your negotiations, you have negotiated and you've agreed and these are accepted. Then you will move on to the third, which is the best, and the sponsor or the vendors will submit their best and final offer, and then after reviewing that best and final offer, the award is made to the lowest price vendor. And as always, if you are unable to award the contract to the lowest price vendor, you must notify decal on company letterhead and submit these bid responses to decal before you notify the vendor. So here's a sample of the RFP evaluation and scoring criteria. So here you will see whether it's points or percentage. So if you opt to utilize points, once you have complete that technical spec evaluation, the vendors who are who submit a response and receive an 85 points or more would move on, versus if you're utilizing percentage, it would be 85%, then they would move forward. And here's just sample cost categories you would use to evaluate, much as with the invitation for bid. Of course, it's going to be price and cost, your management plan, how well they identify that they're able to meet the needs, their financial viability, their accounting and reporting systems, their procurement with doing business with child nutrition programs, as well as other specified criteria. So this is just a sample that you could utilize. Now, moving on to contract cost and price. So the institution sponsor must perform a cost or price analysis in connection with every procurement action in excess of $250,000. So at the end of every contract period, or if you chose to do this quarterly in the midst of a contract period, there should be some sort of analysis that you are doing to make sure that your pricing hasn't changed, to make sure that you are still receiving the items that you requested, that deliveries are being made on time and in a manner that is conducive to federal and program regulations. There should be some sort of evaluation that is going on during the length of this contract period. And that is, again, to make sure that the vendor is in compliance with your program regulations as well as the contract regulations, and that they are indeed a responsive and responsible vendor as required. Next, you want to make sure that the sponsor institution, they have taken you must make independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. So there should be something you are doing on the front end before actually going through this bidding process to let you know this is the average price that we are used to paying, give or take industry increases or decreases, but this is the estimated price that we're accustomed to paying. So before you receive those bids, you want to make sure that you are doing some sort of estimate so that you know whether or not an item you're receiving is materially unbalanced, if you are receiving a price that is just not aligned with what you are accustomed to. And lastly, the cost plus a percentage of cost must not be used. And what a cost plus a percentage of cost contract is, it states that this is what the vendor is charging, but in addition to that, you are also paying for the cost, or for the cost that will be accumulated by the vendor in order to complete this contract. In this situation, this is not for child nutrition programs, this is not really applicable, but this is more so in the case of construction or engineering. So you would have a situation where you would pay, this is the cost that the vendor agrees to pay in order to complete the service, but you will pay a percentage of the cost that they will spend in order to complete the service. And so, again, that is not applicable for these for child nutrition programs. These are mainly used for construction and engineering process, but please be aware that if you have a vendor that states that they are charging, that the contract is a cost plus a percentage of cost, that is a program violation as well as a federal regulation violation, and they are non-compliant, and the contract cannot be valid if this is their method of award. So state agency review. So the state agency will have to review the formal procurement documents as follows. We will be reviewing your procurement policy. We do have a template on hand. If you do not have a document that is already drafted, a procurement policy must be kept on hand, and it must be created for all recipients and subrecipients of a federal award. So if you receive or participate in any of the child nutrition programs, you must have a procurement policy on hand. If you engage in competitive bidding process, then that procurement policy must be reviewed and approved by myself or someone from DECAL before engaging in any sort of procurement practice. In addition to the procurement policy, you will have to have a written code of conduct. Sometimes these are the code of conduct is included within the procurement policy, but you must have a written code of conduct. And your written code of conduct simply states how you will handle things such as less than arm's length transaction, employees that fail to follow the regulations and standards that you have set forth in the organization, how you will handle gifts and gratuities. Those types of things are included in the standard code of conduct. Next, state agency will be responsible for reviewing the advertisement. We went over the information that must be included in the advertisement. Next, the invitation for bid or request for proposal package. And again, if you are an organization that will be drafting your own contract checklist, DECAL must review these items before you can utilize your own template. So all of these items, these 5 items must be reviewed, 4 or 5 items must be reviewed before you actually begin the formal procurement process. So in this event, what will happen is we are notified that you will be engaging in a formal procurement process. Typically, we are notified via the procurement election notice that is sent out prior to every program. What will happen next is we will ask for all of these items. Myself, as a procurement and purchasing compliance officer, I will ask for each one of these documents. I will review them. If there are any changes or revisions that must take place, I will ask you to make those revisions. And once they are all approved and reviewed, then you may proceed forward with the formal competitive bidding process. And this is just to make sure that everything is in compliance, that everything is aligned, so that we're not having to fix anything on the back end, or that a review is conducted and we find out that something was not followed as it pertains to the federal regulations or program guidelines. Next, DECAL, we will approve your bids via email or in writing. Typically, this is done via email. For CACFP, reviews are handled 10 days. There's 10 business days in which we have to review and approve bids, and then there's 5 days for SFSP. Typically, my process is quite a bit shorter, but we will follow suit with approving these bids in either 5 days for CACFP 10 days for CACFP or 5 days for SFSP. In addition to the previous items, a DECAL representative must be present at SFSP bid openings, depending on location. If it is too far outside of the metro area, then we will participate via conference call. But if you are engaging in a summer food service program, formal competitive bid process, a DECAL representative will be present for that bid opening. And so the following must be submitted to DECAL again before we can award that contract. You will notify us of the selected and apparent winner. If the lowest bidder is not awarded, again, you will have to provide that justification. Proof of advertisement postings. And so this is before you are even actually going through the bid process. When the advertisement is still in the review phase, I will ask for those ad postings on the front end versus on the back end. All your evaluation sheets as well as copies of all bids. So whether they were the lowest bid or not, federal regulation requires the agency to review all bid responses that are $50,000 and over. So that means that we will ask for all solicitations, whether they are the lowest or not. And again, lastly, DECAL will approve via email or in writing. More than likely, this will be via email to you to let you know whether we approve or if there is some other adverse response to the solicitation received. Bonding requirements. So bonds are initiated in order to ensure that the bidder is financially capable of performing work consistent with a food service management company. So bonds, they must be used for food service management companies participating in the summer food service program. So bid bonds specifically will be required if you are utilizing a food service management company of the vended or prepared meals in the summer food service program. If you are participating in CACFP and you utilize a food service management company, those bid bonds are optional. And the bid bond will be between 5 and 10% of the bid bond, of the bid value. And what that bid bond does is it guarantees that the vendor is able to provide that pricing through the length of the contract. So again, you want to make sure that if you are utilizing a food service management company for the summer food service program, that you have a bid bond complete with the bid response. But if you are CACFP, it is completely optional. If you want to include or require a bid bond, that is okay, but it is not required. And as also, bid bonds must be submitted with the bid response. If a bid bond is not submitted with a bid response, that bid is automatically rejected. A performance bond. So if you're asking for a bid bond, what must next be required is a performance bond. The performance bond is 10 to 25% of the bid value. So if they submitted a bid response for $250,000, then the performance bond must be an equivalent of 10 to 25%. So let's just say it's 10%. They must submit a performance bond of $25,000 once they have been awarded that contract, and it must be furnished within 10 days. So if you award that contract and notify the vendor on the 1st, they must provide that $25,000 within 10 days, which will be the 10th of the month. And you cannot use a performance bond without a bid bond. They must go together. Performance bond is used in the case of a supplier non-performance. So it pretty much solidifies that you, in the event that a bidder is or a vendor is unable to supply you with that good, you have this performance bond that states that they said that they will do what this requirement, what this bid certifies that they will be able to do. And bid bonds can be retrieved from the Department of Treasury. Where they cannot be retrieved from is you cannot utilize a cashier's check, a money order, escrow, cash, personal check. None of those items can be utilized as methods of a bid bond or a performance bond. This website here, fms.treasury, this is a site that will let you know which bonding companies are available and approved by the Department of Treasury that can be used when submitting a bid bond for any of the child nutrition programs. So you've gone through the contracting process, you've awarded it, you've evaluated it, it's been 1 year, you've done your price comparison at the end of the contract, and you have renewals available. As you know, that formal contracts are 1 year plus 4 optional renewals. These renewals are not mandatory. You do not have to take advantage of these renewals, nor does the vendor. But you say, you know what, this was a great contract. My pricing was in line. We received everything that we asked for, the time frame. If there was an issue, we always receive substitutes. So I want to go ahead and I want to execute my renewals. Contracts that are renewed must be agreed upon by both parties in writing. So what this typically looks like is prior to the beginning of every program year, you should submit a letter or some sort of notification to your contracted vendor asking them if they want to utilize one of the available renewals. And if the vendor agrees, then you will, of course, utilize that renewal. And if there's any additional price increases, so on a contract, and there's a slide that we will get into in just a moment, if there are any price increases that the vendor has experienced, if they want to add that price increase or factor in that price increase to the contract, the renewal, they may do so. If there's any additional items that you needed to add on the back end or some point at the end of the contract, this is also the time to do that. All terms and requirements for the original solicitation must be applied to the yearly renewal. So none of the actual terms and conditions must change during the renewal. Everything must stay the same. The vendor or the supplier must be allowed to accept or decline the renewal. Again, it's not mandatory for either party. And if there are any new items, they must be added as an addendum. So you'll have your contract, but if you're adding new items, you would create an addendum. We do have an addendum page that you can use as a sample to attach onto the back end of the contract in the event that there are items that need to be added. Now, one thing USDA realizes is that in the middle of a contract year, what a lot of program providers were experiencing was the need to add in items in the middle of a contract. Typical contracts, you only add in new items during the renewal phase. You realize that there are new products that you want to introduce. There's some items that, maybe they're no longer conducive to the meal service. The way contracts have typically operated is that those items are added on the end of the contract during the renewal. The USDA realized that some of these items need to be included in the middle of a contract period. So this contract modification was created by USDA. This policy memo was created by USDA, which simply states in the middle of a contracting year, new items may be added to the contract so long as that they do not exceed a specified limit noted within the contract. And the specified limit is a given percentage that USDA recommends not exceed 10%. So if you have a contract for $100,000, and you need to add in purple grapes for this in the middle of this contract period, and your contract says that you can add or modify this contract by no more than 10%. Those purple grapes you've determined will increase your contract by that exact 10%. This contract modification clause states that you can add those purple grapes in, which would account for $10,000 additional dollars to this contract. This is approved, and this is okayed as part of the policy memo enacted by USDA. But this clause has to be stated within your procurement documentation. And once you've added in the contract modification clause, and once the items have been added, what you will do then is at the end of the renewal period, your contract will go from $100,000 to now $110,000. You have to make sure that you are following that process. You may add in those new items as long as they do not exceed that given percentage. Now, at the moment that those items exceed that given percentage noted on the contract modification clause of your contract, then you must take out that applicable, you must follow the applicable procurement method that is related to those items. So if those purple grapes were 15%, you realize that the grapes would total up to $15,000 of new items to that contract. That's beyond the 10% that is allowed. Now it's 15%. And so you must take out a small or informal procurement procedure to account for that $15,000 of new grapes, of purple grapes. And then on the back end during the renewal, what you can still do is you can add those purple grapes onto the end of the contract, which would simply mean the contract would be for $115,000. And so this is a sample of the contract modification where this red arrow is. It says the contract can be modified to acquire additional goods or increases. You want to make sure that this box is checked. And the very next line says the cost of additional goods will be increased by no more than this given percentage. USDA recommends that you not increase the contract by any more than 10%. So something between 1 and 10% is what is allowable for modified goods. Now, if you look a few lines up, you see where you have the course of contract period, but it says this contract may be renewed for, you would put in your 4 optional renewals. And if you go down, it says that the price submitted by the bid response to this original solicitation, it will not change. So you would check this box if there will be no contract adjustments allowed. And then that very next box is that price adjustments for each renewal period will increase or decrease by 2%, 3%, 5%, what have you. When it comes to your contract renewal, and this is different from your contract modification, when it comes to the end of the contract renewal, if you have a given 2 or 5% and your vendor says, hey, we've had an increase in pricing, my increase in pricing, we're going to have to increase it by that 2%. That's allowable when it comes to this contract renewal. You want to make sure that you've given a percentage in there so that the vendor knows if you will allow for price adjustments. And typically, vendors will state that there will be a price adjustment because they're able to track at least a year in advance. They can probably see on certain items whether or not there will be a sort of price fluctuation. So you want to make sure that you make that option available to them. Record retentions, we're all familiar with the record retention requirement, which says that they must be on hand for 3 years plus the current year. So you want to make sure that all vendors and suppliers you are in a formal competitive bidding process with, that they're able to comply with that record retention requirement. And lastly, we have some resources that are available when it comes to helping you assist with the formal procurement process. We have, of course, the procurement manual, which everyone should familiarize themselves with, as well as the procurement and purchasing policy template. Again, everyone that is a recipient or a subrecipient of the federal award, they must have this procurement and purchasing policy template on hand. Next, we have the procurement webpage. This is your one-stop shop for everything procurement related. So all documents, all sort of templates, our master classes, again, very last line, our master classes for local sourcing, small purchase, micro purchasing, and this one, which is competitive bid process. These all will be noted on the on the decal procurement page. And lastly, this is my contact information. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me. Please feel free to send me an email. I will be available to answer any questions. This masterclass will be posted on our YouTube page for you to take advantage of. Please review it and watch it and take as many notes as possible. And again, if you have any questions once you view this and had an opportunity to study it a little bit, I am here to answer anything you have. Again, I want to thank you for participating in our procurement masterclass on the competitive bid process. Thank you.